but recently she is focusing on the Caucasus region, so her perspective will be very useful and interesting. We also have on the panel Ihar Krulik from EPAM Systems with lots of experience with SME digital development. And it is also my pleasure to introduce John Breckfeld, Chairman of the Board, European Business Association in Georgia. So we'll have quite a good pool of experts who will provide information and share experience worldwide, and at the same time experience what we have in Georgia, what's going on, what are the tendencies. So as it was already mentioned, the main topic of today's session is SMEs approach to digitalization, what's going on in this direction, what are the plans worldwide and also in Georgia. So the first question I would like to address, I guess almost all panelists, it goes regarding the status of the SMEs, their readiness, their willingness to invest in digitalization, because it's obvious that with this new reality, companies, like large companies, are investing more and more money in digitalization. So what could be said about the SME sector with less resources, financial and not only? So what's going on in this regard? So maybe we could start with a World Bank perspective, just regional approach, and something about the Caucasus region as well. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Can you hear me well? Do you hear me well?
Yes, yes. Please proceed.
Great. So thanks very much for the introduction. As my colleague said, I am based in the World Bank, and as our mandate is to support developing countries, most of my comments and perspectives take that approach and take that angle. I think the first point that I would like to make is that we do have a tendency to throw this word digitalization around. I think that it's great that this crisis has put the focus on a very, very important issue. I think there is a risk that we casually use this phrase without really ever going down to the nitty-gritty of what that means and what that implies for business owners, for people on the ground with limited resources who need to adapt to this crisis and to adapt to this evolving world that we live in. At the very, very heart of it, at the very simplest, digitalization, as we call it, can simply be taking bookings and orders over the internet. Not everybody can provide services online. If you think of hairdressers, if you think of bakers, people who make food, lunch food to order, taking orders online, especially in the case of my clients, it's not necessarily simple. We don't always work in countries that have the digital payment systems that, of course, have the infrastructure, that have the internet bandwidth to allow that. So that has actually been some of the challenges that we have faced right at the very, very beginning, before we start to get to technology adoption, before we start to get to soft logistics. So I wanted to make that point. Of course, a lot of the emphasis at this point now has been about moving services online, even in cases where it was rare to provide online services in the past, for instance, with health services, tutoring, legal services, and even where it was previously unthinkable. I'm thinking of fitness classes, for instance. But even taking it to just working from home, as many of us are, including myself, again, having the ICT infrastructure to do that has not been as obvious or as simple as we think. Even in the Caucasus, I can tell you that there are many countries, to remain unnamed, and regions where we had information to tell us that there was 100% coverage. But what does coverage mean? What we found is that where there was 100% coverage, that was good enough for Facebook, but it wasn't really good enough to work and to actually work for 8 hours a day whilst your children are doing their schoolwork for 8 hours a day, whilst your partner is also working for 8 hours a day. In other places, there was the 100% coverage. The speeds were good enough, but the hardware has gone overlooked. Hardware isn't something that we in the World Bank typically focus on. We do have programs that allow our beneficiaries to use vouchers to purchase hardware, but I wouldn't say that providing computers or providing computing power for schools or for individuals has been something that we've focused on specifically a lot in our projects. And what we found was, as I say, where we had done previous work to make sure that there was the ICT infrastructure that was necessary, individual homes, individual businesses didn't have the devices up to date or the computing equipment up to date to allow them to do what they needed to do. In a broader sense, in the most common parlance when we talk about digitalization, it's really a lot of it about technology adoption. I think that again has been fine when we've talked about large firms. If you think of large agriculture firms across the world using precision agriculture services, using precision agriculture equipment, using data platforms to provide up to the minute, up to the second information on weather patterns, on soil, on market prices. But again, when it comes to the individual or when it comes to the firms, we're a little bit stuck. Each small firm is extremely distinct in its individual needs. For a company like ours, we don't necessarily have the structure to be able to do one-to-one consulting in order to provide tailored, specific solutions. Again, we can provide vouchers, we can provide education, we can provide training, but that only really gets you so far. And what we find is that we're only able to support our clients and our beneficiaries up to a certain point, and we never really get to that point where, in the case of technology adoption specifically, where we really see that difference being made on the ground. And that's something that we're working with now. We're looking at the way that we do business. We're looking at the way that we do work. We're looking at the way that we're responding to this crisis. There are some shoots of hope, I think, in realizing that there is this issue at the SME level. We've had more discussion, we've had more open conversation, and we're starting to find strategies and ways to deal with the issue. And just one more note, if I might, about the fact that downstream soft logistics has become important. We now see e-commerce being a core part of our clients' economy. Home delivery and curbside pickup, as we call it here in the US, relies heavily on soft logistics. It relies on you being able to have a network of deliverers. That could be vans, individuals walking on bikes, in cabs, who you can connect with quickly, immediately. But what do you need to be able to do that? It's not simply infrastructure and internet speeds, it's also mapping services that are up to date. It's traffic information that is up to date. If I book something, I need to know that it will take 30 minutes, if it will take 5 minutes, if it will take 2 hours. That influences my buying decisions. If I don't have accurate information the first time, I'm less likely to use that service a second time. So things like address information systems, which is not necessarily an issue in Tbilisi, but you can see, I think, that in lagging regions, certainly in our other client countries outside of the Caucasus, there are not very clear, obvious, and standardized address systems, where this has really created an issue. So I just wanted to touch on this point as well, make a point that that's something that we're also working on in the World Bank with our clients. It's a challenge for all of us. It's a new field for all of us, but we're excited to be working in this field. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Indeed, this new reality puts us in a situation that decisions have to be done very quickly, but at the same time there are a lot of opportunities, and different companies could work in different directions. But still an issue of opportunities and resources available, especially for the SME sector, it's really crucial. May I ask you, John, what is your experience since being working in Georgia? What is the, I don't know, level of digitalization within Georgia from the SME sector or in general?
Thank you very much. If you directly ask my experience, so I'm Belgian original and working for 16 years already in Georgia. My experience directly, I would say that as representing a company, a big company like a Gosselin, we have an IT infrastructure, okay, but if you see this SME, and especially in Georgia, the smaller SMEs, there is a fundamental problem there. And maybe I firstly introduce a little bit what we are doing to get the point. The European Business Association, we are representing more than 100 Georgian businesses, and actually 90% of them are SMEs. So what we are doing, we're facilitating the trade between Georgia and Europe, and we're advocating for European businesses in Georgia. Our work is actually policy-based, so we do research studies, we make position papers, and we actually just did a position paper on digitalization in Georgia. Actually, it was quite active because due to the pandemic, everybody went from the normal business to the online business, and we faced some problems there. The smaller businesses, the first biggest issue actually, I would say, was the laws. Georgia was not that far yet in laws on e-commerce. There was a lack of executive mechanisms. So Georgia had a problem there. And Georgia was working on it, but unfortunately this summer suddenly the pandemic, everybody got used and it went downhill again. People started again just normal working. In my view, and especially in Georgia, you really see a difference between the big business, the large businesses, and the SME sector. A large business, it has the financials, it has, like World Bank was telling also, it can make infrastructures, it can make, for them, focused databases. An SME doesn't have that. An SME has to rely on available products on the market already, which they can share, which people develop. But when people develop, they need a mass customer base because an SME doesn't have a lot of money to pay, so they need a lot of customers to develop. And there we have a problem in Georgia, two problems actually. First one is that the lack of scale, the scale of the market. Georgia is not a big market. So most developers would not go to Georgia, would prefer to be in Europe. The second, connected to that, Georgian language. It is not so simple to just make everything into Georgian language. So you have the existing programs who are always in English version, but then you have the problem in Georgia that people are telling, okay, you need to have it in Georgian for reporting issues. So that brings up the price for SMEs, which is very difficult to pay for. A last and also important fact I would mention that is actually an issue is the skills, the labor market. When you have these IT programs, if you have the digitalization of all these databases, you need to have qualified people working with it. You need to train staff. And this is actually when we did analysis of all our businesses, all our companies who are our members, that was the #1 priority problem, that we have a lack on skills, a lack of training programs, and also especially for digitalization, for these kind of things. That was a big issue. Thank you.
Very much. Well, exactly, the lack of human resources could be one of the main challenges we have here, and not only here, because not only willingness and existence of resources could help in this regard, because you also need some people that will do this quickly and efficiently.